I'm here, it's a Sunday afternoon. I just changed out of my pajamas to make this video, and I want to talk to you about this book right here. I've been reading this book this summer. I read some chapters from it as part of my ISTE Academy course that I took. Particularly the chapter on accessibility informed a lot of what is on our IT for Teachers accessibility page, and she's got a great chapter on reducing student cognitive load through designing online course materials that are really good. But I kind of went back to the beginning this morning and started reading from the start, and I wanted to read an excerpt to you, if that's okay, about her experience and how it really shaped her use of blended learning, because I think it really does a good job demonstrating the power of blended learning and kind of the opportunity that we have in this moment to do things in a new way and maybe expand our toolkits in a powerful way. So this is from chapter 1, and it's from a section titled My Story. Believe it or not, I did not start out as an incredibly techie teacher. I have always enjoyed using technology in my personal life, but when it came to my first teaching assignment, I was a fairly traditional second grade teacher. Like many elementary school teachers, I used small group instruction as an important part of our literacy block. I felt strongly that this was essential to growing readers and writers. I worked hard to create independent work that would keep my students engaged and quiet while I worked with small groups. I created beautiful laminated station activities and file folder games. My students also each had their own journal for reading response activities. My learners would do independent or partner reading and then answer prompts in their personal journals. Although I felt good about the instruction happening at my little kidney table with those small reading groups, I soon became dissatisfied with the independent work during our reading block. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but my metric for success in that environment was compliance and not learning. Students were quiet, were on task, and appeared to be engaged in the activities. The problem was I didn't feel like learning was happening in this space. It was practice at best. At worst, it involved students practicing skills incorrectly without me really knowing how they were doing. I was measuring success by the noise volume in the room, the students' attention to their tasks, and honestly, the cute factor of my laminated activities. This was not good enough for my learners. I wanted to provide instruction for all students in my class, not just the 5 or 6 in my small group. And then she talks a little bit about taking those reading response journals home every night in her little rolling crate and how hard it was to find the time to give them feedback. And then talks about how she wanted to do something different. Enter some student devices. As a first step, I changed the environment for the reading response activities to a digital discussion board. I started this transition with some mini lessons on sharing in a digital environment and writing constructive comments. Students learned about leaving helpful feedback for their friends that moved beyond basic, "I like what you wrote" statements. Then an amazing thing happened. By simply moving this work to a digital space, the quality of work I saw from my second graders began to skyrocket. I had given my students an audience. It may not have been global or revolutionary, but it was someone to write for, peers that were invested in interacting with their work. All of a sudden, the work mattered again. Plus, the feedback on the writing was no longer my sole responsibility. The students were keeping each other accountable, learning how to give helpful peer feedback. The other benefit that I quickly noticed, which was the spark that ignited my love of blended learning, was my changing role in this independent activity. Before, I was limited in my ability to teach during the stations because I was always with a small group of students. Leaving handwritten feedback in the reading response notebooks was equally inefficient because of the time it took to find each student's latest entry and then write out my thoughts. I found I could type or record feedback a lot faster than I could write, and with the discussion board, all of their responses were in the same place. More importantly, I started to take advantage of that digital feedback to actually teach. I was able to ask my students questions, give them additional prompts to address when they got back to class, and share resources to expand their understanding. I no longer had to be physically next to students to teach them. My teaching may have happened at 9 p.m. at home or during my in-school prep period, but the metric for success of student-independent work time was no longer compliance. I knew how my students were doing, and I could take an active role in their learning. That was the light bulb moment for me. When I saw the benefit of simply moving this kind of activity into a digital environment, I began to realize that I could create online lessons for my students. I could create opportunities for instruction and assessment, and then use the data I received from those digital lessons to guide the face-to-face instruction in our classroom. Essentially, incorporating online learning into my second grade classroom gave me the ability to clone myself. When I used technology to free up the time, place, and pace of learning, my role as a teacher grew, and the learning experiences in my classroom were richer. A small change made a big difference for me, and it can for you too. I love that little vignette of how this real small shift of moving what she was already doing into the digital format made such a big difference. I also want to read this very brief quote that I think is really important and made me think a lot of our faculty at Woods. The other thing to keep in mind as you design your perfect blend is that it is not about the technology. Software, online lessons, and devices cannot improve learning on their own. A highly effective teacher is still the most important aspect of any classroom. The technology simply allows you to restructure your classroom in a way that puts an emphasis on student-centered learning, data-driven decision-making, and individualized instruction, all of which are possible only with a skilled teacher. Even as we move into this remote learning period and things look really different, I want to remind you that your presence as a skilled teacher in your classroom is still the number one most important thing, and it's more important than any piece of technology or device that we could put in your hands. And even if all you were doing was sending letters back and forth to your students via snail mail to teach them over the next 7 weeks, some of you would still have a really profound impact on your students because of the skilled work that you do in your own classrooms. And technology hopefully will facilitate that and make it easier, but it is definitely never going to be successful on its own without your careful and thoughtful presence.